Welcome to Five on the Floor. This is Ethan Skolnick. Mateo Mayorga has been hosting a series on the 2006 NBA Championship, the Miami Heat's first NBA title. We're now going into the 20th anniversary season. He's already sat down with Eric Reed and Ira Winderman. This is his interview with Tim Reynolds of the Associated Press, who was there courtside for the majority of it. Tim still covers the Miami Heat for the Associated Press, and you can catch his work there. This is Mateo Mayorga with Tim Reynolds. This is sponsored by Prize Picks. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E. Put down your 5, get your 50 to play right away. And now the latest 2006 championship episode, Mateo Mayorga and Tim Reynolds.
Uh-oh. Yeah. It's Mercy. Music by Mercy again. Heat Nation. We the culture. Yo, E, I need you to call timeout. Need Brady to set the floor plan. Tropical blanket. Open for the shot. Yo, Greg, set the pick. Still 5 on the floor. Still ride for my dog. Still battle on the court. Still survive in the war. Keep your eye on the ball. Or get burned from the keep this mic off the wall without turning the cheek. From night to day, no sleepy pads or allowed to morning. The nut is sleeping us. Never catch us snoring. Live from Miami. Report in the heat with 5 Reasons Sports from the courts to the streets. Yeah. Wade County, Heat Nation, we say it proudly.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
Welcome to another edition of Mateo's Hoop Diary. It's hard to believe, but the upcoming season, 2025-26, marks 20 years since the Miami Heat's first championship, which came against the Dallas Mavericks in 6 games in the NBA Finals. And for this reason, we are joined by a very special guest. He is here to give his expert testimony on all things Miami Heat 2006. We are very lucky to be joined by Tim Reynolds of the Associated Press. How are you, man? And thank you for being here.
I'm looking around for the special guest, Mateo. I don't know who that would be. No, thank you, man. I'm so happy you reached out. I'm glad to do this.
Excellent. It's important to start this story, Tim, at the Game 7 loss in 2005, because this shattered a great season for the club. They had won 59 games in their first year with Shaquille and Dwayne teamed up. They were the first seed since December 12th, all the way to the end. And of course, there were injuries like Dwayne Wade's rib injury. Shaquille had the thigh injury. What was the mood and the state of the team following this letdown?
There was, as I recall, after that Game 7 loss, and it went, I mean, if you remember, they had the game with 2 minutes to go, even with Dwayne playing really hurt. Dwayne had to get an injection just to play in that game. He didn't play in Game 6 in Detroit because of the rib, muscle cage. There were things going on in his side where he just, it's tough to play. It's tough to be Dwayne Wade if you can't breathe. And that was a lot of it. And it became one of the long line of what ifs in NBA history. What if Dwayne hadn't gotten hurt? Would they have gotten it done that first year? That night, I just remember there was obvious frustration because, the game was in their hands and there was just a couple of bad turnovers down the stretch. Obviously, Dwayne wasn't Dwayne. I know Damon Jones had a pass that he would want back to this day. Shaquille felt, as if he'd let everyone down. There was a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of self-reflection. But to me, the one memory that I have from that long ago was we were all around Shaquille's locker. And here's this massive man with this incredible booming voice, obviously. And if you weren't within 6 inches of him, you couldn't hear him. His voice was a whisper. And there was just so much. I mean, it ends so quickly. Like they were going to the finals. They had a game 7 at home. Of course they were going to win that game. They were going, and then it's over just like that. And there was shock, there was anger. But more than anything, it was just sad. Like they knew they'd let one slip away. And then it became the question of, are they good enough? And that led to a lot of a lot of introspection, I guess you could say. And it was only Dwayne was a kid. It was just Dwayne's second year in the league. Dwayne had gone from, going out in the second round the year before. I mean, the natural progression of things was you go to the second round in year one. That's really good. I mean, obviously they won a great playoff series his rookie year. You get Shaquille the second year, you go a step further. By all accounts, this should have been a really good year. And nobody was interested in looking at it in those terms, which I did think set the tone for what was coming. None of us knew the personnel moves and all that were going to happen, but it was very clear that being good wasn't enough. Good enough wasn't enough for that team. That they were put together for one reason, and that was to win it all. And that when you think about 3 years earlier, that team had won 25 games, obviously with a very different cast of characters. But you go from 25 and 57 one year to we have to win a championship or else. It was sort of a really radical time and really some radical thinking. And it just illustrated how much Dwayne and Shaquille changed things in Miami.
See, naturally, with that loss came some new additions. The team got rid of Damon Jones, Eddie Jones, Keon Dooling, Razul Butler, added some to name a few: Jason Williams, James Posey, Antoine Walker. What do you remember from the public reaction, be it media or fans, to these new additions?
Well, the first thing I remember is the trade and how it wasn't so much the parts that were in the trade. That there was the 5-team trade, which at that time was the biggest. Um, the KD trade this past summer with what, 7 teams and 15 players or something in it, that has now taken over as, quote, the biggest in terms of just sheer people within the deal. But that 5-team trade, basically, Miami gives up Eddie Jones in the trade. And then you get Antoine Walker, who, at that point, great reputation. You get him from Boston. Everybody knew he could shoot. He was a Kentucky Wildcat, so that might have been a special affinity there for Pat Riley, just because he likes his Kentucky guys. You get James Posey, who unless you were like a real hoop head, I don't think you knew a lot about James Posey, but James Posey was a very clear glue guy, as we saw in Game 6 months later. I mean, that was, he made the shot in Dallas that there's 2 shots from that season that we'll get into that nobody talks about enough. Gary Payton shot in Game 3 and Pose's shot from the corner in Game 6. And then you get Jason Williams. So now you have a quarterback. Damon Jones played a lot of one, and I'm not going to crap on Damon Jones, but Damon Jones played a lot of point guard, but he was not a point guard. Damon Jones wanted to be a 3-point shooter, and Damon Jones had a gift for being able to shoot the 3. Jason Williams was a pass first point guard. And wow, that is exactly what Dwayne Wade and Shaquille O'Neal needed. So to me, Antoine Walker, obviously a huge part of that deal. James Posey played a big role for that team. But when you can add Jason Williams in that, and basically you're in that trade. Now, like you said, they gave up other rotation guys over the course of that offseason. You didn't give up a whole lot from your rotation, just Eddie, who was a big part of the Heat. Don't get me wrong. Obviously a South Florida guy, still beloved down here. But when you make that trade, and there's so many moving parts, so nationally it's like, wow, this 5-team trade, it's huge, it's crazy. Oh my gosh, it's great. Miami knew it got a lot for a little out of that deal. And all of a sudden, Shaq had a point guard. And Shaq always needs a point guard. So now he had a real one. And Jay Will was just the perfect fit for that group at that time.
Fast forwarding to training camp, what was the added level of intensity going into this season compared or contrasted with a year earlier when Shaquille linked up with the team?
Again, I think it was just a continuation of all or nothing.
Yeah.
I think that was the approach. Dwayne was going into year 3. Dwayne had a new he had a lot of confidence. He had been in People Magazine's 50 Most Beautiful. He was a national brand now. He had a shoe deal. He had other people knew who Dwayne was, and Dwayne was starting to embrace that in the right way. Don't get me wrong, but Dwayne knew he wasn't a what if. Dwayne knew he wasn't a okay, what can this kid become? Dwayne knew that he was on the cusp of being there. You had Udonis now taking on um even a bigger role. Like, he had proven that he belonged in the NBA. And of course, that was a huge question. The first couple of years of Udonis, is this just a hometown guy that they have here? No, Udonis became a really important part of that group. And then, Shaquille was as driven as ever to get that fourth championship. He wanted to break the tie with Kobe. They were both on three, obviously, because they'd gotten a three together at that point. So they were it was clear there was one goal for that team. And, the culture was the culture even then. And Stan Van Gundy was very clear that this team was not going to skip steps. And as I recall that training camp, some players didn't love how hard that training camp was. Stan Van Gundy was the coach in that camp, but it was a Pat Riley training camp in a lot of ways. So the groundwork was set. The expectations were set. I think Jason Williams was pretty much seamless at that point. I think he came in and fit really nicely right away. So the expectation was clear. There was only one. Nobody cared about a division title. No one, they used to actually hang the actual division banners and stuff like that. Nobody cared about that anymore. It was about one thing. And that was made very clear from day one in camp. That's what Shaquille came to Miami for. That's what he talked about. He had established Dwayne. Flash was Flash at that point. Shaq and Flash were real. Now they needed jewelry to go with it. So it was very clear what that season was about.
Was there anyone who wasn't in shape?
Oh, I think a lot of guys weren't in shape. Well, not at
Oh,
each.
yeah.
Um, you know, uh, Starting with one of the beat writers. But no, I'm serious.
Oh, oh.
No. I mean, Antoine was never like in great heat shape. Antoine got in good shape by his standards, but um, and Shaquille's weight was always a bit of a mystery, but he they were good enough. Let's put it that way. Were they in optimal Pat Riley weight and body fat? Did they want all that? No, no, no. There were certainly some guys that were not, but the I don't know if I want to, I guess the elixir, if you will, the medicine, if you will, was they played hard. They got into it at that camp. That camp was physical. They those games mattered. Those practice sessions mattered. So that team showed it had a competitiveness. It had a willingness to compete. Alonzo Mourning was on that court. Let's not forget that. When Alonzo's around, a tone is set that no drill is irrelevant. No, especially no defensive drill in Miami. There was some hitting. Udonis has told some stories over the years about what some of those 5-on-5 runs were like. And if there had been officials, if there had been technicals, if there had been fines, there would have been some guys who were broke. They got into it. So I think that was the trade-off. Was everyone in perfect shape? No. But you could tell that that team was going to fight because they fought each other in the right way. So you knew that would carry over to the 82 games.
The 82 games are described as really being a roller coaster, and it really started in game two because Shaquille hurt his ankle, spraining it on the right side against the Pacers. How much it cost them 18 games. They went 9-9. How much did losing such a focal point put pressure on the players and the coaches in the early season?
Yeah, because you've taken your plan and you've blown it up at that point. I mean, here's the guy that you've co-built everything around, and you have, you don't have your five now. So everything that you've talked about, every plan you have, now you have to go to plan B, plan C, plan D, whatever the case was. Was it 18 or was it 19? Because I don't think Shaquille
I'm sorry,
came
it was
back.
19. It was 18.
I
I'm
think it
sorry.
was 19
Sorry.
because
Right. Right.
I think we all know the next game that Shaquille played
Yeah.
was there was a
The-
change, which I think you're going to get
yeah.
into. So,
Right.
again, teams need look. They were about 500. What were they? 10-9, 9-9 in that stretch. I think they
Yes.
were 1-1 after those first two games, and then they were 11-10 when the change happened. So that's 10-9. They held water, which was fine. I mean, the East didn't get away from them. The season didn't go awry. If they had gone 4-17 in that stretch, who knows what would have happened, right? So they managed to do enough winning to stay. The season wasn't lost. Everyone still knew what the goal was. Everything was still in front of them. But losing Shaq for 20 games or 19 games, whatever it was, uh, you know, if I remember it right, was a pretty good sprain, but again, that's a pretty big man. So any sprain is going to be, it's going to take some doing. But an idle Shaquille can be a challenge for a team because while he was resting the ankle, he was still very loud, still very vocal. And not everybody always appreciated or understood Shaq's sense of humor.
A moment ago, you mentioned Alonzo Mourning's presence setting a level of intensity, this type of tone. Shaquille has been infamous for his time in LA when he said he would recover on company time if he got hurt on it. How diligent was he in his recovery from this ankle sprain in the early season?
I would like to invoke my Fifth and 14th Amendment right. Question.
Okay.
We don't know. I think there was a sense in the organization that Shaq could have come back a little earlier than he did. I
Okay.
might I might leave it there for now. I am not an athletic trainer. I do not know. Um, I do know that I think the initial I mean, look, teams have gotten away from timetables, and I think a lot of it is for reasons like this. When you say somebody's going to be 2 to 4 or whatever, and then it goes longer, it's okay, what went wrong, or what didn't you tell us, or whatever. I don't know. If you had told us, let me put it this way, if you had told us after the second game that Shaquille was going to miss 19 games, that he was not going to come back for, 6 weeks or whatever it was, um, I think we all would have been a little surprised by that. So, did he push the envelope? No. Um, there's a lot of guys to this. I mean, we see it now. Guys don't want to play to their quote 100%, whatever that means. Um, there might have been some gamesmanship going on too, because there was a lot of other things going on behind the scenes, right? Around the team at that time.
Around that time, well, Stan, well, he stopped being the head coach of the team, and publicly the team said it was voluntary. But this is where it gets dicey because Shaquille had a problem with him after Game 7 against Detroit because he felt he didn't get the ball enough in the fourth quarter of that game when he was cooking, and he was complaining about Stan to anyone who would listen, and in the off season. And being respectful to Stan because he also mentioned he wanted to spend more time with his family. Tim, what's the real story here on the forum on Stan not being the head coach anymore?
Stan was not fired.
Not fired?
I'm just going to say it just for what it is. Stan was not fired. It absolutely did not happen. Stan tried to resign more than once in those first 21 games. I can tell you that. And they kept talking about it. Now, who they is, was it a combination of Mickey, Pat? I think even Chris Riley might have been involved in some of those talks. Like everyone wanted Stan, the front office wanted Stan to be the coach. Pat was planning for hip replacement surgery. Pat was not planning to come back and coach. Pat had a bad hip that he wanted to get that taken care of. Pat had things that he had other plans. He did not intend to coach. This notion that's been around for 20 years that Pat pushed Stan out the door. To my knowledge, it is not true. He wasn't fired. Stan resigned. They eventually, after the second, third, fourth, whatever it was time that he was like, I got to do this. I can't coach this team. Eventually they gave in and accepted it because they knew there was going to be a point of no return. I mean, you can't have a head coach who can't handle Shaquille. Shaquille was impossibly hard on Stan. And I've been told that not by front office people, but by players who were on that team. Shaquille, his sense of humor is a sense of humor, and it's not for everyone. And sometimes it goes too far. I wasn't back there. I don't know what was really said, what wasn't really said. But I think I think, first of all, Stan wanted to, I mean, he wanted to be around his kids more. And I think the point to Stan was, if I'm not going to enjoy coaching, like if I can't enjoy coaching Shaquille O'Neal and Dwayne Wade, then why am I going to go through this and miss time with my kids? His kids were, I want to say his daughter was like a preteen or just maybe just going into her teenage years. Like it's a, it's an important time for all times, really, for kids. But I think it was a delicate time for his kids. He wasn't enjoying it. I don't think he thought Shaq respected him. I don't think he thought Shaq would listen to him. I think we all know Stan well enough to know that he very driven, also very stubborn sometimes. And when he convinced himself that Shaq wasn't going to let this team listen to him, I think that's when it became obvious to him that he had to step away. And the Heat tried many times to keep him in place, or I should say multiple times, because I'm certain of at least one. And then the second time he resigned. Now, whether there were other instances in those 6 weeks of the season between game 2 and game 21 that he tried to do it, I don't know. But I do know that wasn't his first time offering his resignation that season. So Shaq was hard on Stan, and I think eventually Stan just said enough's enough. And Pat had no choice but to accept it and to come back. And if we all recall, like at the press conference where they announced it, I've known Pat Riley a lot of years. I don't think the man fake cries. The man was crying at that press conference because Stan meant a lot to him, and it didn't work out. And I think that upset Pat a lot. And to me, that is the proof that the stories that I've been told over the years are absolutely true, that Pat did not force him out to come back and coach that team. Because if the same thinking would have applied then in 2010 when they were 9-8 with LeBron and after Bumpgate in Dallas, if the same thinking applied, he would have replaced Spo. Like, I just don't think I don't think Pat did not force him out. I should have ended it there. We'll just end it there.
See, how did the players adapt when it was Pat walking through the locker room door instead of Stan?
I think there was more of I don't know, in military terms, I guess it would be 10 hut. I think guys just snap to attention a little bit more. I mean, he was Pat Riley. They should have. I mean, Stan was and is a brilliant basketball mind. Stan's a hell of a coach. If I was an NBA fan, they hired Stan Van Gundy to coach my team today, I'd be ecstatic. Stan can coach. He knows the game. Shaquille wanted to be coached by Pat Riley. And Pat could take as good as he gave. I think, Shaq's humor or his sarcasm, his jabs, whatever, Stan just said enough. Pat wasn't going to take that. So I think that may have made Pat a better fit to coach Shaquille. For those who think that team couldn't have won the NBA championship with Stan, to me, that's a what if, because I think they could have. I think they were good enough to win with Stan. You can't judge them by 11 and 10 because, like we've said, they didn't have Shaquille for those 19 games. So who knows what would have happened? But Shaquille felt they were more suited to win a championship. And when your co-best player thinks that, it's probably the best thing for the club.
Right. One of the turning points of this regular season was when they got waxed by the Mavericks, and then in their next game, they are in a very close win against the Pistons, and they're able to beat them. Coach Riley called it a watershed moment. But what, in your estimation, what changed for the group emotionally, physically, or all around for them, starting with that win in the regular season?
I think they were just embarrassed that they got their ass kicked. I mean, that was, they lose that game in Dallas. I remember it well. It was, what was it, 112, 112.76.
Yeah.
It wasn't that close. I mean, they just quit in the second half. They were asleep. Um, Pat didn't play Jay Will very much in that game. Pat didn't play Pose very much in that game. They only took 60 something shots, which in today's NBA is like a good first half for teams. Like they were just asleep. The All-Star break was coming. Were they tired? Did they take a night off? Is the, is there a version of South Beach flu in Dallas? Who knows what hit them that night? But they lost that game by 36 points, and it may as well have been 360. It really, there are moments for every team that when you get drilled, you're going to find out who you are. And that wasn't on Pat. That wasn't on the coaches to fix. That was on the players to say, this can't happen. And of course, there's delicious irony, right? That it's in Dallas. That nobody, no rational person would have said 4.5 months later, you're going to go back to Dallas and you're going to win an NBA championship in this very building. No rational person would have said that. And by the way, Dallas had come to Miami and won pretty easily earlier in the year too. So it was, I think it was earlier in the year. Dallas beat them twice.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. Twice.
Pretty easy. So it didn't seem like a great matchup for Miami. I don't think people thought that Miami team would have been the one coming out of the East anyway, because they were prone to just the off night. And when it was bad, it was really bad for that team for whatever reason. Like it would just go south in a hurry. And, a lot of it, Dwayne was still young. Shaq played, by the way, look it up. Shaq played pretty well in that game. And I think Dwayne played pretty well in that game. And literally nobody did anything else. Like the rest of the team shot like a combined 30% or something crazy. But to take only 66 shots in a game where you're behind, and common sense tells you you're going to be pushing the tempo. We're going to shoot some more threes. You try to get out and run. You got to score some points in bunches. You're down 15, you're down 20, you're down 25. You got to get back into this thing. Also, too, in fairness to the era, like, Spo says it all the time now, a 20-point lead is nothing in the NBA. 20-point lead in 2006 in the NBA, the game was over. So I think there was some quidditch that night going on. I think they only scored 11 or 13 or something like that points in the fourth quarter. They knew they were beat. So teams then let games go a lot more often than you see now. That was definitely a part of it. But they were horrible in that game, start to finish.
With a moment ago, you also mentioned how close Pat and Stan were with how emotional Coach was at the press conference. How quickly did Eric Spoelstra start becoming that new go-to assistant after, when Pat really came back to the bench?
Oh, I think it was immediate.
Immediate.
I mean, people, I don't think a lot of people know this, Mateo. I don't think a lot of people know that Stan still had a role. He just wasn't around. I mean, he wrote longhand notes to Pat that he would send in or slide under the door or something like that. He was giving Pat his thoughts on the team, I want to say, if not daily, several times a week. So Stan was still part of it in a lot of ways. He just wasn't visible. And Eric was this kid who predates Pat. I don't think a lot of people realize that. Eric was hired before Pat came to the Heat. Eric was brought on about a month before, and he thought that Pat was going to get rid of him the minute Pat got hired, because I think, as most people know, when Eric was hired to work in the video room, Eric didn't know a thing about what that meant. Eric didn't know a thing about the video room. He was a smart kid and he knew a lot about ball, but he didn't really know what being a video coordinator was. So he had to learn on the fly. And I guess we can fast forward to now and say it all kind of worked out for him and worked out for the Heat. But Eric was not, always destined for greatness, but he was super smart. He was always there. He worked really hard. There was a lot of things that endeared him to Pat. And at that time, he was kind of like the unknown entity on that coaching staff. So I think whether he did it consciously or not, he just clicked with Pat in a way that when it came time years later, 2 or 3 years later, for Pat to start thinking about, okay, am I really done again? Ron Rothstein wasn't going to be the one. Bob McAdoo wasn't the one. It was going to be Spo. And that shocked a lot of people in the NBA when they made Spo the coach in '08. Just because here was this kid, he was super young. You go back and look at the pictures, he looks 12 in those pictures. It's crazy how young he was. It's crazy how young he still is, really. But um, Pat just liked the drive, and Pat just liked how hard the guy worked and how he was always there. Um, it also helped Spo a lot that he was Dwayne's guy. I remember, like, it would drive us nuts as the press corps because you go to practice, and Dwayne was great about media. Dwayne was great about, giving us time almost every day, if not every day. He would always talk, but we'd be waiting up there forever for him to get done because Spo would be working him out for 45 minutes after practice. And Spo would be, I mean, I can still see the drills. When Dwayne learned that bank shot, it was from hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of Eric Spoelstra throwing him assists. And they would be up there forever. And we'd be standing there like, can we just go home? Traffic's going to start building on 95 North soon. We got to get out of here, man. Come on. It helped Spo a lot that he was the best player's guy. But that's not why he got it. It just was one of those many, many things that fell into place for Eric. So between Pat seeing a lot of himself from a generation or two ago in Eric, Dwayne loving him, players loved him. He was the cool, hip guy. He could still play. He didn't play in the league, but he could play well. I think there was a lot for players to respect about Eric Spoelstra. And then Pat just liked the drive and the smarts.
I see. Fast forwarding now to the 2006 finals. What do you remember about the expectations from, like, in terms of being the favorite, with how people were calling this series before it started? Because I think I remember when I was watching some of the old clips, someone highly respected by myself and many others, Rick Bucher from Fox, kind of talking like it was going to be kind of one-sided, and I understand a lot of people thought that way. What do you think?
Yeah, Rick Bucher didn't like that team very much, I don't think. Um, I think they had earned a puncher's chance. I mean, so I think some people, to answer the question, we got to go back a couple of rounds. They go up, they win the first two against Chicago,
Mhm.
and then they lose the next two in Chicago. So all of a sudden, now you're on the ropes. Now it's a best of three. And it's 3-2 going back to Chicago. The Bulls have a lot of reasons to be confident. They just beaten them twice in Chicago. The last thing I think Miami wants after losing the game 7 a year before, really one round before, because this was the next time they were in a series.
Right.
They lose the game 7 to Detroit in the East Finals. Then in round 1, you've got to go win in Chicago to avoid a game 7 on your home court in round 1 the next year. And then Shaq plays, I think, his best Heat game, the 30-20 game in game 6 at Chicago. Shaq was not going to lose that game. Shaq was the best player in the world that night. And okay, so now you've won a big one on the road. You beat a good team. You get into round 2. They lose game 1 to New Jersey. For you young kids out there, New Jersey used to have a team. It's now Brooklyn, but most people know that. They lose game 1 to New Jersey, and like nobody cared. Like nobody was worried. I just remember, like, it wasn't gloom and doom. Oh my gosh, we lost game 1. Home court is gone, and they roll in the
Four.
next. They roll in the next 4. Like that. So to me, okay, now they're showing signs of we're down 1-0 in the series. We've given up home court. Nobody cared, right? Like nobody was worried. Then you've got to go through Detroit again. And it's kind of an up and down series. They have a chance in game 5. They don't take advantage, so they come back home. They've got home court. They took home court away from Detroit by winning game 1 or 2. I can't remember which. I think it was game 1. No, I think it was anyway. They split the first 2 in Detroit. I remember that much.
Yes.
So they've got home court back. They get home. They get to Miami. It's 3-2. You can close out Detroit on your home floor. You don't have to go back to Auburn Hills for a game 7. You're in the same situation you basically were a year ago. 1 win at home to beat the Pistons and go to the NBA Finals. And all eyes on Dwayne, all eyes on Shaquille, no eyes on Jason Williams, who plays the game of his life and starts 10 for 10, finishes 10 for 12. And to me, like, the image of that night to me is they do the trophy ceremony. They weren't doing these conference MVPs at that point. It was just the conference trophy. And Shaquille O'Neal could not have cared less about it. Wasn't there for that. And that was his way of sending a message. Yeah, this thing is nice. They gave us a trophy. We're going to the NBA Finals. We get hats and shirts and all that stuff. That's cool. I don't care. So you see all that, and you're like, wow, they've done everything right. You know, they go in, they close out Chicago on the road. So they can win a closeout game on the road. They've checked that box. They've handled the series deficit against New Jersey. They've checked that box. They closed out the rival. They avenged what went wrong a year ago. They beat Detroit in Miami to go to the NBA Finals. They've checked that box. Why wouldn't they have had a chance against Dallas? Because it clearly was not the same team from February. Now, Dallas was very good. I mean, Dirk is Dirk. And Dirk was Dirk then, too. Like, they've got home court. They've got it all going for them. To say Miami wasn't favored, fair. But to say they didn't have a chance, they had done all the things in the first 3 rounds for people to say, yeah. And they had Shaquille O'Neal. I mean, they had a guy who had done it 3 times. You had a lot of guys in that team. Gary Payton. You know, Gary Payton was I want to say a September signing. You bring in a guy like Derek Anderson for you give up Gerald Fitch for Derek Anderson at the deadline or around the deadline. Derek Anderson made them a lot better defensively. There's a lot of stuff to like about that Heat team. So it really, I don't know if it was just hate the Heat. We don't like Shaq. Nobody liked Pat. I don't know what it was, but I did not understand. And granted, I was probably looking at it through heat-colored glasses, sure, but I just didn't understand why nobody thought Miami had a chance in that series. I wondered what I was missing because I really thought they did.
You know, the first game, they were really, you kind of feels like they blew it because they missed they only made about 25% of their threes. They missed 12 free throws, mostly Shaq and Dwayne Wade, which, well, you can expect that with Shaq, but not too much with Dwayne. But that was the game that it felt like they should have won. What do you remember from the mood of the team? Because a moment ago you mentioned, you know, they dropped it against the Nets. No one cared. They're like, we got this. But what about this time? A couple series later.
They weren't that worried after game 1, as I recall. Like, they had 2 cracks in Dallas to win 1 game. They just wanted to bring it back to Miami 1-1. That's all they were talking about. It's all they were thinking about. They had, like you said, they knew they had opportunities. They knew they left points on the floor. They thought they were going to win game 2. They were not worried. They thought it was New Jersey all over again. Okay, we lose game 1, albeit that one at home. You know, we came here to get a split. We're going to take this thing back to Miami 1-1. There was a ton of confidence after game 1. I think after game 2, it was, because then you're doing the math in your head. We've got to win 4 out of 5 against this team. And that means there's no more room for error. Like, we've got to win 4 out of 5. They needed a spark badly. Unworthy opponents was the spark they needed. The parade route leaking was the spark they needed. all of a sudden they went from on the ropes. Like if it was a boxing match, the Mavs had won the first 4 or 5 rounds of that fight, and they were rolling. They were Drago. The Heat were Rocky with no chance.
Right.
And then Rocky beats Drago when the fans start chanting, whatever. When the fans start turning toward him. Well, when the Heat found out about that parade route, all the negativity about how much they'd given games 1 and 2 away, that all went away. And this thing, it appealed to every fiber of the culture being that Pat Riley was trying to instill. The 15 strong cards were that year. Pat had this. It was the neatest gimmick I still think I've ever seen, when he had like basically this little shallow pool set up in the middle of the locker room, and it was covered from us, so we never saw what was in it until the very end. And Pat had guys putting things in. What will you give up to win this championship? What does this championship mean to you? Guys were putting watches in there, putting pictures of their family in there. I don't know for certain. The story is that Shaq dumped a ton of cash in it. It wouldn't have shocked me if Shaq did that. There was a lot of material things in that pool that was hidden. And the 15 strong cards from Pat, it was very simple. The messaging was very simple. All we need is us. All we need is the 15 guys on this team. And I think belief was starting to shake. I think having to beat that Dallas team 4 out of 5 to win an NBA championship. If the parade route wasn't released, I don't think they win that series. If the unworthy opponents headline comes out, I don't think they win that series. These guys went from on the ropes to pissed really fast. And that was the spark. And we all know what happened from there.
The turning point came in really well. They were having a really good first half of Game 3. They collapsed with the last 5 minutes of the third quarter. Obviously, in the last 6 minutes of the game, Dwayne Wade going berserk. But before we get into that, Tim, Shaquille had a terrible performance in Game 2 where he only had 5 points. He didn't pressure the opposing defense enough, excuse me, and he took it very hard after that game. What do you remember about his preparation for the third? I know you said the team was really pissed, but what do you remember about him specifically, his preparation for Game 3?
He was really quiet.
Right.
And that wasn't like him. I mean, Shaq was always the life of the party. He used that a lot because Shaq liked the spotlight, sure, but Shaq also wanted to take the pressure off guys, so he put it all on him. But in those couple of days between 2 and 3, it got very quiet. Like, he couldn't believe he got outplayed by Eric Dampier. Like, he just couldn't believe that. And again, it went back to what he was thinking after Game 7 the year before. He just felt like he wasn't doing enough. He had a lot of critics for leaving LA, a lot of criticism for how he handled the relationship with Kobe. Critics for, the way he was, I don't even think we called it deferring then, but the entire showing, I mean, he took heat for showing up in an 18-wheeler with a water cannon, and spraying fans with a squirt gun. Like, it was the most playful Shaq thing of all time. And Shaq does have, I mean, I think he's gotten better in time, but Shaq had amazingly thin skin, and Shaq wore it all. Like, it came out as humor. He made it seem like nothing bothered him. Everything bothered Shaquille. They were going to win this championship. Dwayne was the best player, sure, but that's what the Heat wanted. But Shaq put it on him that they were going to win this title. And he got very quiet, very dark, but also very angry. And this was the side of Shaquille that nobody had really seen yet. Like, they took their cue. Dwayne, everything ran through Dwayne on the court, but the locker room took its cues from Shaq and, to a close extent, Zoe and Gary. They were the leaders, and they were furious, and they were not quitting. So Shaq, there was the infamous story of him picking up Dwayne, and I'm pretty sure it's true. Like they went and got Shaq and Zoe went and got Dwayne before game 3 and drove around that night and just told him what had to happen. And I think it was like this weird, like three-way therapy session for the three of them. Like Zoe still wanted his ring. Shaq had his ring, but they're telling Dwayne, this is what you have to do. And to this day, I'll never come off this thinking that if that conversation doesn't happen, Dwayne doesn't say, no, I'm not going out like this. And he actually said that. That's not made up. That quote was said. I ain't going out like this. He said it during that game. And he walks to the scorer's table down by 11 or 13 or whatever it was. And
13.
the world in Miami changed as we know it.
So, seriously were the Mavericks taking the heat after losing that game? Because when you're up 13 points in such a crunch time situation, you think you got it in the bag.
Oh, Rick Carlisle was. Rick Carlisle was taking them absolutely
Brad,
seriously.
no, John,
I'm sorry.
Johnson,
Avery Johnson.
No,
Avery
no,
Johnson was.
you're good.
Got my years confused.
No,
But Rick Carlisle was probably taking them seriously too, even though he had nothing to do with that series. Avery Johnson was taking them very seriously. Mark Cuban was taking them very seriously. 2-0, you're feeling good, but you know what's the saying? A series doesn't start until somebody wins on the other guy's home floor.
Right.
They had just done their job, and that was the message they were trying to convey to their guys. Dirk knew it. I don't know how Jason. There were guys that they understood the deal, but it was 2-1. Just felt very different,
Right.
and the pressure was suddenly shifting right back to Dallas, to the point where they changed hotels before game 5. It was a 2-3-2 finals then. There was going to be the 3 games in Miami. So they were in Miami for a week. People knew where they were staying. People were calling the hotel at weird hours. I don't know if they were actually reaching guys because they were all using fake names and stuff like that. But it was a very different time. And 2-1, the pressure began really creeping in. Game 4, it suddenly was like, uh-oh, this is a best of 3. And now these guys believe they can do whatever they want. And Dwayne's getting every call. And look, Dwayne to this day will say, check the tape. I got fouled. He's not wrong. They fouled
As far as that game, the Heat built a pretty significant lead in that game, too.
Yep.
They up 20 points and multiple points in the fourth quarter. But how much did their psychological edge or elevate from the moment you mentioned where Shaq was telling Dwayne what he needed to do in the car ride to now the series is tied?
I think the psychological edge was once you beat them once, now you know you can do it. Like they really felt like they'd figured out the formula. And, the one advantage that they had, now again, and like I said a few minutes ago, I truly believe that if Stan's coaching that team, they still could have won the NBA championship. But Stan wouldn't have pulled out the tricks that Pat pulled out. Like Pat did say after game 2, we're coming back here on June 20th. And we're going to win this thing. Like Pat was unwavering belief. They just needed something good to happen. And that last 6.5 minutes of game 3, all of a sudden now they believe. Gary's shot from the right wing, I still think there should be a little mark on that corner of the court where Ray hit the 3 against San Antonio. And there should be a little mark on the court where Gary Payton hit the jumper against Dallas with 9.1 seconds left. It's one of the most important shots in Heat history, and nobody talks about it. But there were a lot of guys who felt like yes, Dwayne was the story, but James Posey made plays. Jay Will made plays. There were a lot of guys who felt like they contributed to that win, and now all of a sudden the mood changes. Then you go from down to now it's tied. Now you've got it 1 game on your floor for a 3-2 lead. And now what Pat said to you in Dallas, which sounded like crazy person talk at the time, we're not going to come back here and win this series. What's he talking about? Holy crap, it might happen. Like, wow, this thing might actually be written. This thing might be predetermined. The belief was off the charts. And it's crazy how it changed. And it changed on a dime. And once they had the belief, they never let it go. Once Dallas lost the belief, I mean, the Heat weren't blowing them out. Like, Dallas was right there. The Heat had one edge, and that was the belief. I mean, and Dwayne, so two edges. But the belief was the biggest thing. Without that, I mean, Dallas could have won in 4. If the parade route hadn't been released, Dallas was winning that series. Period, full stop. Miami just needed something extra, and that was the extra. And once those guys got going, they were just crazy enough to believe that they could win the thing. And Dwayne, oh, by the way, turned into the best player in the world for those couple of weeks. And everything Pat told him would happen did. So Dwayne can do no wrong. And you look at the games, he didn't do anything wrong. It's just it's belief was everything. And that was Pat's mystique. Stan, it might have happened with Stan, but without Pat sprinkling the fairy dust on top of all the other things, the headline and the parade route and all that other stuff. When they knew, I'll say this, and I know this from, I won't say who told me, but with absolute certainty, I can tell you that the second they found out that the Mavs changed hotels before Game 5, the series was over. They knew they were winning.
In that Game 5, it went to overtime. They pretty much shut them down defensively, holding them to 25% shooting. And then, obviously, a great game from Dwayne as well. And there's a famous story about Pat Riley checking everyone's luggage, heading to Dallas or whatever for the suits. I know this seems trivial, but was there any clarification? Like, let's just say they had lost. What do they do if they only have one pair of clothes? Do they go to Barney's? Do they go to Saks? Do they send somebody?
I think Pat would have had a suit sent. Now, here's a funny story. I probably shouldn't say it.
Oh, you should.
Not everybody adhered to the one suit policy.
Oh my goodness.
But there's a reason why that didn't happen. Andy Ellisberg was moving at the time.
Okay.
Andy brought a lot of stuff with him. It wasn't in violation. It's just a weird fact. Like, trust me, Andy's as superstitious as anybody. So if Pat says we're going to win Game 6, they were going to win Game 6. But the funny part is that Andy had a lot of stuff with him because he was literally in the midst of moving. And I just don't remember if he had, I don't know why it ended up, but he traveled with a lot of stuff beyond that trip. Not like everything he owned, mind you, but like for whatever reason, he took more stuff than he needed. Okay. And I don't know if it just got sent there accidentally. I don't know how it happened, but there was a little bit of extra. The players, I'm told, nobody knows of anybody who brought an outfit for June 21st.
Okay.
I'll leave it there. I don't think anybody had an outfit for June 21st. Some guys wore stuff on the plane that they didn't wear to the game. But that's the magic of NBA fashion too, right? Like it was, the plane coming home. But one suit, one shirt, one tie. Pat got on that plane for Dallas on June 19th with one of everything. That I can promise you.
Tim, you've been so awesome, and I only got a couple more left for you. In Game 6, the Heat shut down Jason Terry, who was killing when just curling around for jumpers and just slashing to the rim. And Dwayne Wade and Udonis Haslem led the team in scoring. I believe Dwayne had around 34 and Udonis had about 36 around there. How did this championship changed it.
Wait a minute, you didn't have 36 in that game.
No. Dwayne had 36 and he had 16.
Yeah, there you go. Yes.
I apologize if I
I
misspoke,
would
but
have been like, that would have been a totally different finals if UD was scoring 30s. I knew what you meant.
How did that win, that championship, change the two of them?
Oh gosh. Wow.
Dwayne's profile elevated.
I think it turned Dwayne from Flash, which was a character, into Dwayne. I think, actually, let me put it this way. I think he was Dwayne. Then Shaq came and made him Flash. And then it became D-Wade. And that's what we know now. His story, both of their stories, Dwayne and Udonis, are so unbelievable that I know the stories. I've written about the stories. I know the stories are real, and I still think they're made up. Like, this doesn't happen. Like, the poor kid from Robbins, Illinois, does not become this in 3 years in the NBA. He does not avoid the pratfalls that kids in Chicago fall into at that time. He's raised by his sister, Tregill, who I absolutely adore to this day. A billion things went right for Dwayne because they all needed to. If 999,999,999 things go right for Dwayne, this story changes. 1 billion things had to go right for Dwayne. And they all did because he made them happen. He stayed out of trouble. He was, by all accounts, just a fabulous kid who never accepted the fate that life was going to give him. You were going to be poor, you were going to be anonymous, you were going to be forgotten, you were not going to be great. And he was like, screw you, you're wrong. And he just put his nose down and worked hard. People forget he couldn't play his first year of college because he wasn't academically qualified. That's another hurdle he had to overcome. He was a Prop 48 kid. He wasn't going to play there.
Mm-hmm.
Then you take Marquette to the Final Four. Who are you? He comes to Miami for I think it was like his 21st or 22nd draft workout. It was by far the worst workout he had. The worst workout Dwayne Wade had going into the 2003 draft was with the Miami Heat. And that is not in dispute. Everybody to this day says it was the worst workout he had. Why did the Heat draft him? He shakes Pat Riley's hand, and Dwayne's hand comes to about here on. And Pat's like, oh, hello. I can work with you. He was the type of kid that you fell in love with immediately. They knew. All the stories about Chris Kaman and how Pat had to be bullied into drafting Dwayne over Chris Kaman. Yes, Pat wanted a center, but no, he was not going to let Dwayne go. Now, it would have been weird if Toronto hadn't taken Chris Bosh. If Dwayne went to Detroit at 2 instead of Darko, he wasn't going to go over Melo. If he had gone over Chris Bosh, that might have been interesting. There might have been a weird call for Pat. Does he take Chris Kaman or Chris Bosh? It all worked out perfect for Dwayne. For Udonis, my favorite Udonis story is Dwayne's in the gym in Miami after getting drafted. They're working out for the start of Summer League. And Dwayne wants to know who's the guy in the braids getting all the rebounds. And they're like, that's Udonis Haslem. And Dwayne's like, Udonis Haslem is some fat kid. Who's that? He didn't know. He didn't recognize Udonis. That's how much Udonis changed his body with that 1 year in France.
Wow.
He did not believe that was Udonis Haslem. They end up becoming inseparable. Dwayne went, and the story goes that one day Dwayne went to buy a car, and Udonis told him to get the same car, and they had the cars with the peanut butter interior and all this. Like they were wearing the necklaces, they were the baggy clothes, like they were BFFs. They were twin brothers. Couldn't have been more different and more alike in so many ways. The answer to the question you asked an hour and a half ago, how did this
No,
change
no.
them, was it just validated the journey. And they didn't need it to prove that they had overcome enormous odds. Udonis being an inner city Miami guy who nobody wanted in the league because he was too big coming out of Florida. Um, it allowed Dwayne to be Dwayne. Like Udonis is one of the most successful people I know now. I mean, everything the guy touches turns to gold. He's a great investor. He's brilliant on television because he's just unabashedly Udonis. He says what he thinks. He's figured out this TV thing so easy. He just tells the truth and says what he thinks. Smiles when he says it. Who would have thought Udonis Haslem would have been this guy? He's great on TV. So that title made that title validated that they were somebodies. And then they became great somebodies in a lot of different ways. But the fact that I think the coolest thing, one of the coolest things the Heat have done since they started retiring numbers is not waiting too long to retire Udonis's, because
Right.
LeBron, you can argue Dwayne's I don't know how we quantify it. Is LeBron the best player that played for the Heat, or is Dwayne the most important player? And, CB is CB, and Tim Hardaway and Shaq. And, I think Glenn Rice's number should be up there. That's just me. But Dwayne is the standard for the franchise forever. And Udonis is the heart of the franchise forever. And 2006 allowed that to happen.
My last one, Tim. Why couldn't they keep it going?
Because it's the NBA. I think you had so many guys that chased something for so long. That 2006 team, you asked me in the beginning who came into camp out of shape in 2005. The answer in 2006 was pretty close to everybody. They partied for 2 months. Antoine to this day will tell you that he was not fit to play coming into that camp. Shaq had passed Kobe. A lot of guys had gotten what they wanted. And I think, too, the Heat were already starting to pivot. Like, they knew how old people were. And then they were starting to pivot to, well, what's the next thing? Well, this LeBron guy's pretty good. This Chris Bosh guy's pretty good. They're all going to be free agents at once in 4 years. I don't think the Heat did not go into 06, 07 thinking about the 4-year plan, thinking about what it would take to get them all. They were thinking about what was going to happen in 2010 because everybody in the league was. But Chicago did them a favor. Chicago did them 5 favors, really. Beating them by 42 points on ring night in 2006. It's kind of set the tone for a pretty disastrous, what was it, 40 and 42 or 42 and 40, I can't remember, but a pretty disastrous 500 season. And then sweeping them in the first round, that finished it. And it was finished before that, but Chicago did not give the illusion that this Heat team could continue in its current form. And that's when they knew they had to take it to the bottom. So I think a lot of guys got what they wanted. They got their championship. They were getting older. Everybody had to adjust to this new world, this new role. And the Heat were willing to take it to the bottom in 07, 08 to try to get Derrick Rose. They didn't. They ended up with Michael Beasley. And the funny part is that if you end up with Derrick Rose that year, if you win the lottery and you get that number 1 pick instead of the number 2 pick, you probably don't get LeBron and Chris 2 years later. So it's weird how the ball bounces sometimes. It's weird how the ping pong ball bounced in that case. But They couldn't keep it together because Shaq had his fourth. Pat did not want to keep coaching. I mean, remember, that was when he was taking time off to go college scouting, and Ron Rothstein would fill in. That era of the Heat, that version of the Heat was gone, and it wasn't coming back. So there were about a billion reasons why they couldn't keep it going. But they were smart enough to push the reset at the right time. And 4 years later, something pretty cool happened. So it hurt at the time, those guys, I'm sure, but it all worked out for the franchise in the end.
Wow. Tim, you have been so awesome. This was an incredible interview. I can't thank you enough. And I know the audience is going to think this is so sick. Thank you so much for doing this, man.
The audience is going to think this was too long, Mateo, and
No,
I
they're
apologize
not.
to all of
No.
them for it. But no, thanks for having me. I appreciate you, man.